2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the foundation of an American popular culture mosaic. This is the Everything's a Primary Source podcast, a show dedicated to learning history through pop culture. I'm your host, Eric Salmonson. As part of the America 250 public history road trip, I traveled across the country collecting stories, each one a piece of that mosaic, connecting personal experience to the media, people, and places that shape our lives. This season brings those stories together because pop culture, at its core, unites us. Everything is a Primary Source is, therefore, a way to understand your history, my history, our history, through popular culture. Sage, thanks for joining me at my table at my podcast exhibit. And you were telling me before we started hitting record that your background, your interest is archaeology.
Yeah. No, I've been interested in just history for a while now. I think since 7th grade, I just had this one teacher who went really in depth about Carthaginian history. It was fascinating to me. I've forgotten most of the details by now, but just that one spark.
It's interesting how there's so much stuff just under the surface everywhere, not just in the ancient world, and I'm part of a society called the Society for Commercial Archaeology, and they deal with things above the ground, like signage and diners and roadside Americana type stuff. And I think that actually does have some things to do with your selection today. What did you choose to talk about?
I chose to talk about the book The Little House, which is actually a book that I have a very hazy memory of having, I think maybe at my grandma's house.
When I found this particular copy, probably about 10 years or so ago, the exact same thing that happened to you moments ago happened to me. I was like flipping through the pages. I'm like, I know this story. I remember it. Something tells me there might have been a Reading Rainbow episode about it because I feel like the images were animated, or at least there was sound added to it in some way. But it's, it's an award-winning book. It's a Caldecott honor book. So the illustrations and, of course, the text tell a story. Remind us, what's the story of The Little House, essentially?
I seem to remember it having to do with this house where a city gets built around it, and it kind of gets lost within this city, and then one day it's picked up and moved back out to this wide open prairie.
Yeah, it's this beautiful little cottage that is... It has like a face throughout the whole book, doesn't it? As you flip through the pages, you'll see it. It looks very happy in its original setting, and the people in the book, like the focal point and the perspectives of the images remains essentially the same for most of the pages. You don't really get a zoomed in version of it. You don't see the people from up close. They're little tiny figures. In the first couple pages, it brings you through year after year, generation after generation. You can tell it's probably late 19th century, heading into the 20th century. And then somewhere around then, the city, which is always in the background, just kind of looming, comes and swallows up the house, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And 1942 is when this book came out. I mean, that is the ideas and behaviors that it conveys, is the story of the built world being swallowed up by progress. What's kind of the perspective on it that you remember? Is it a positive thing, negative thing, neutral? Is it just kind of telling it how it is?
I seem to remember the house being very sad that it doesn't have its picture-perfect world anymore, as the world's kind of moved on without the house, in a sense. And
do you think the author, this book is obviously geared towards children. It's a children's book. It's a picture book. Do you think that the author, which is Virginia Lee Burton, was waving any kind of warning flag or just kind of telling a story?
I think it might have been a little bit of both. often they do tell stories with these books because stories are what sticks the best in children's minds. But I do think there is this sort of warning there of look what could happen. And it might be a relatable story to children growing up in the 1940s.
The growth of cities has been part of the United States, and part of the project that we're working on right now is connecting things back to the Declaration of Independence in some way or another. The pursuit of happiness, which is part of that declaration, oftentimes brings people, not houses, but people from countryside to big cities. Cities are where the opportunities are. Cities is where you can get jobs. Cities is where you can get culture.
And yet you see this big retirement community being fostered in the countryside as people move away from those opportunities and go back to the quiet life, which I think is honestly something that gets reflected in this book because it does come full circle and the house is moved back to this prairie.
The house is being already made into a person in a way. You're right.
Yeah.
It moves back out. And it does end with that happy ending, which is, of course, almost this. Buildings can be moved. If you're in the museum world, you know that plenty of times museums will actually have buildings brought to their campuses and things like that. But it's not very super common.
That. We might be able to come back to it at a different point.
Go ahead and tell it right now. This is all part of the experience.
No. I had a very interesting grandpa growing up, and what he ended up doing is he had this big house right up against the road, and he thought he was too close to the power lines. He didn't like all that energy, and so he decided he was going to move back his house like 50 yards. But not the full house, because that would be crazy.
Right.
So he only moved the part of the house that he used, which meant he took, I think, one of the bedrooms, one of the bathrooms, the kitchen, and the living room, and just moved it back 50 yards by his pond, completely leaving like half of the house behind. It was like the middle third of the house was just shot back to his pond. And anytime anyone drives by that, it just looks so strange. But it looked stranger because he wasn't able to finish drywalling half the side of the house. So there's just this giant tarp on there. If you look on Google Maps, it's still there. It's kind of crazy.
So why haven't you written that into a children's book? Is that on the way? I mean, that says it right there. That's a story.
I might, honestly. Very interesting guy. Very interesting story.
Yeah, and it seems like he had, that spirit of I'm my own sovereign person. I can make my own decisions.
He was his own sovereign person, indeed.
This episode is brought to you by iCivics. I've been implementing the library of educational games from iCivics in my social studies classrooms for years. The engaging, fun challenges that are enjoyed so much by students are incredible teaching resources because of the depth of research and passion for civics that's behind them. The latest game from iCivics, Investigation Declaration, is no exception. In it, students are invited to think and investigate the inspiration and legacy of the Declaration of Independence freely, providing just enough guardrails to ensure success. The game maintains a balance between difficulty and frustration, giving the students freedom to form their own theories. These are exactly the social studies skills I love encouraging among my students, and iCivics has long provided the best way to get there. Visit iCivics.org today to learn more about Investigation Declaration, as well as the entire catalog of iCivics games.
Very, very American of him, right? I'm not going to ask permission to make my life more comfortable. I'm going to do it myself.
Turns out he never actually got the permits that said someone could live there, but he was already living there, so no one could kick him out. So we had problems trying to sell the house when he finally passed on, just because he did everything himself.
Well, so much of those kinds of codes and laws they're rather modern, aren't they? They've kind of caught up with us. And especially in your interest area in archaeology, and you were mentioning things about with GIS systems, and that is also a very modern thing. But I'm sure in your work in those areas, you get to know that previous time periods didn't have those kinds of rules and restrictions, in large part because of what this story is telling here, the little house, that rapid growth and progress happened so quickly that in many ways, local, state, even national lawmaking had a tough time catching up with it. It wasn't really something that was immediate that you could immediately follow and say, okay, you can't do that because that goes against this ecosystem, or you can't do this because we might have, you can't just dig anywhere you want. There might be power lines underneath it. Back in the 40s, back in the 30s, even before that, yeah, whatever, do what you want. There's no laws. This book came out in 1942. The house I live in was built in 1939, so right around the same time. And this book is coming out. And I don't think there's any chance of Milton, New Hampshire being swallowed up by a big city. The closest big city, I guess, would be maybe Portland, Maine. But
yeah, we've got a similar thing in Warner. I think the only city that might be able to swallow us is Concord, and most people don't even consider that a city if you go too far from here.
It's pretty small. I mean, it's a city technically, but it's not like a hellish metropolis that's, going everywhere. And,
not in any way.
Non-stop traffic.
It's not going to become the new Times Square.
I mean, that's what this book, it doesn't really identify any particular city that it's in. It's all fiction, but when the city does arrive in this book, it's not nice. There's black smoke everywhere. There's, you can see the traffic building up. There's L trains, you can't even see the house after a while. It's maybe even kind of warning a little bit about, and maybe she would be on the side of a trend that happened after the Second World War, and that would be urban renewal. The concept of the cities have gotten too old and broken. We need to start all over again. And so this house, I don't know, maybe she would be in favor of that, of separating what good you can find, the elements of the past, separating that from the urban areas, and then start all over again. That maybe I'm off. I mean, do you get that sense by looking at this that she'd be in favor of a restart, or is she in favor more of like we took a wrong turn somewhere?
I don't know. Like I said, I haven't really read the book in forever, but I would be able to tell my own opinion, which I think is that there is a place for cities and there's a place for countries, and I don't necessarily think that we should be all in on one side or the other. I think there is a place for development, but maybe having regions that get that development versus having regions that are left alone would be helpful.
That was on a lot of people's minds in that era, and even before. When we think about the way our country culturally, sometimes physically, has been separated against itself, we know, of course, in the 19th century it was a north and south divide. But by the 20th century, absolutely by the 1920s, and I would imagine it would continue into the 30s and 40s, it was an urban versus rural. That the rural areas were perfectly content just saying, leave us alone. Let us have our own quiet, slow way of life, where the only sounds of the city you might hear would be when we turn the radio on. That we're not looking for the hustle and bustle. If we want that, we'll go to the city. But if we don't, leave us be. And they were, the countryside in that era, alarmed by, all right, we might have radio, but now we have movie theaters coming in. And movie theaters are conveying attitudes and ideas that, through their films, that may not have been always welcome in these quiet rural areas. And then eventually, late 40s, you have television. And the culture kind of, the urban culture, urban attitudes, urban viewpoints are showing up in maybe not the most welcomed way. People are like, I don't want that. That's why I live here. And maybe that's the story she's telling. Maybe it's all backwards about this urban rural stuff. Maybe she's saying, look, there is, like you just said, a place in our country for urban culture, and there's definitely room for rural culture. So I guess another thing that comes up, of course, is that this book came out in 1942. It probably took some time to make. But, I mean, the fact that a children's book that has nothing to do with, say, something like the ongoing war in that era, what does that tell you about just the because, we're talking behaviors and ideas. Does that tell you anything as a person living in the 21st century that you didn't necessarily know? Because as I'm talking to you, I'm looking over your shoulder and I see a poster from, it looks like the First World War, but during the Second World War, there was posters, signs everywhere. We get this idea, rightly so, that era was all hands on deck. Everybody was thinking constantly about the war effort. This book says otherwise. This book doesn't really mention anything like that.
Yeah, it does kind of tell us that there was this big perspective outside of the war. And it makes sense if you think about it. I mean, not everyone's day-to-day life was just going to be war, war, war. I mean, you can see America kind of moving on even in the face of the war, as you see women starting to enter the workforce because they just needed to fill those positions. That kind of points to America continuing to have this growth in infrastructure, even if they're sending people overseas every day.
Mm-hmm. And actually, and I'm glad you brought that up. It's in this book, in the story, it is a woman who identifies the house as her childhood home, and she starts the process of getting it moved back to what looks like its original placement, but it's actually not, of course. It's fabricated. It's a new location. But Sage, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this. And
thank you.
Thanks
this
for
was very interesting.
Being part of the project.
Honestly, I hadn't thought about this book in years, so this was fun to revisit.
And I almost didn't bring it, but then I was just going through my stuff. I mean, this is quite literally a 100th of my collection.
Oh, I bet.
I have so much stuff, and I was going through it the other day, and I was like, this book, I think somebody's going to want to talk about it. And I was right about that. Thank you.
Somebody did.
Awesome.
Each podcast episode has us uncovering another piece of the mosaic that is the American experience through pop culture. It's what connects us across backgrounds and perspectives. These episodes are here to be enjoyed, but they're also built to spark learning in and out of the classroom. Visit everything-history.com to learn more. Be sure to like and share this episode and the podcast itself. You can follow Everything as a primary source on social media, including YouTube and especially Instagram. I look forward to you joining me again next time on the EPS podcast, where everything is a primary source.